He was a dying man, a 27-year-old from New Jersey with a death sentence hanging over him, given months to live by the doctor who shook his head and told him to get his affairs in order. He had tuberculosis, one of the most feared diseases in 19th century America, and no money, no prospects, and a family trade he could no longer work. You would think a sick, broke young man with no formal education and no path forward could never build anything of consequence, right? Well, John Batterson Stetson managed to create the most iconic hat in American history. He built a company that would grow into the largest hat factory on Earth, employing over 5,000 workers in 25 buildings spread across 9 acres of Philadelphia. He gave the American West its defining symbol. And he did it all because he was dying. So how did a boy from New Jersey, who doctors said wouldn't survive, become the man who put a hat on the head of every cowboy, lawman, and legend of the American frontier? To find out, we have to go back to Orange, New Jersey, in 1830. John Batterson Stetson was born on May 5, 1830, the son of a hatter, one of 12 children. I want you to think about that for a moment. 12 children in a single household in 19th century New Jersey, where life was hard and money was harder to come by. His father, Stephen Stetson, ran a small hat-making operation, and from the time John could walk, he was being pulled into that world. There was no childhood of leisure here, no summers spent without purpose. From the time he was old enough to understand what a hat was, John was learning how to make one. You see, his father's shop taught him everything: how to select the right fur, how to work the felt, how to shape a brim and block a crown. He learned the chemistry of hat making, the way beaver and rabbit fur could be agitated and compressed into a fabric stronger and more water-resistant than almost anything else a man could wear. It was a craft that required patience and precision, and by all accounts, young John absorbed it completely. But John never attended a formal school, not a day of it. His mother taught him to read and write at home, which was not uncommon in that era, but it did mean that the world of books and institutions and professional credentials was effectively closed to him. What he had instead was a trade in his hands and a hunger in his chest that no one in his family fully understood yet. His father believed in quality. The Stetson family did not make cheap hats. They made hats that lasted, hats that held their shape, hats that were worth what a man paid for them. And this philosophy, that the product itself had to be exceptional, that no shortcut was worth taking, would become the single most important lesson John ever learned. He just didn't know it yet. By his mid-20s, John was working in the family business, pulling his weight alongside his father and brothers, learning the full scope of the trade, from sourcing raw materials to training workers to selling product. He was good at it. He was, by every measure, on his way to a respectable life in the hat-making business. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything. In the late 1850s, John Stetson began to feel it. The cough that wouldn't quit, the weight dropping off his frame, the exhaustion that came from nowhere and refused to leave. He went to the doctor, and the doctor told him what he already feared: tuberculosis. In the 19th century, this was not a manageable condition. It was a death notice. Tuberculosis moved through the lungs methodically, stealing breath and strength and, eventually, life. The medical establishment of the era had no cure. What doctors could offer was a recommendation. Get yourself out of the damp, humid air of the East Coast. Go west. The dry mountain air sometimes helped slow the disease. Sometimes, in rare cases, it even helped the body fight back. His doctor told him he had only a short time to live. John Stetson was in his late 20s, and the path he had been walking, the hat shop, The craft his father taught him, the future he had assumed was his, had just been ripped out from under him. Most men would have stayed home. Most men would have spent whatever time they had left near family, near the familiar. John Stetson decided to go west and die on his own terms. He left New Jersey and made his way to the frontier, first Illinois, then St. Joseph, Missouri, which in those years was one of the great jumping-off points for westward expeditions. St. Joseph sat right on the edge of the known world, the last real town before the vast open territory that most Easterners only read about in newspapers. Wagon trains assembled there. Prospectors passed through. It was rough and alive and nothing like anything John had ever experienced. He needed money, so he found work. He ended up in a brickyard on the Missouri River. Not exactly what you would picture for a trained hatter, but survival required adaptability, and John Stetson had already proven he was adaptable. He worked hard enough that within a relatively short time, he had risen to manager and then to part owner of the brickyard operation. Things, for a moment, looked like they might stabilize. Then the river took it all. In a single brutal season, the Missouri River rose and flooded the brickyard. The operation had laid out 500,000 bricks along the riverbank to dry, the entire inventory of a season's hard work, and the floodwaters washed every last one away. The business was ruined. The investment was gone. John Stetson was back to nothing. He tried to enlist in the Union Army when the Civil War began in 1861. That door slammed shut too. The military took one look at his health record and turned him away. A dying man wasn't a soldier. He was a liability. 3 catastrophic blows in quick succession. The death sentence of tuberculosis. The flood that destroyed his business. The military rejection that closed another door. I mean, at what point does a man simply stop? At what point does the weight of misfortune become too heavy to keep moving forward? John Stetson's answer, apparently, was not yet. In 1862, he joined a party of men headed to the Pikes Peak region of Colorado. The gold rush in the Rockies was still pulling dreamers and desperados westward, and Stetson went along partly for the altitude his doctors had suggested might help his lungs, partly for the gold, and partly, I think, because a man who has already been told he's dying doesn't have much to lose. The journey west would change everything, not in the way he expected. He didn't strike it rich in the Colorado goldfields. But something happened out there on the trail, something that would turn out to be worth more than any gold seam in the Rockies. At some point during the journey, the group needed shelter material. Canvas was scarce. The party was exposed. And Stetson, drawing on everything his father had taught him, offered to demonstrate something the rest of the group had probably never seen. He could make fabric from animal fur. No tanning, no weaving, just the felting process, agitating and compressing raw fur fibers until they locked together into a dense, waterproof cloth. He collected pelts from animals they had hunted and started working. The group watched, probably skeptical, as Stetson produced a remarkable piece of felt from what had been loose animal fur. But instead of using it for a tent, he did something his companions found hilarious. He fashioned the felt into a hat, a massive hat, a hat with a brim wide enough to block the punishing western sun and a crown tall enough to trap a man's body heat on cold nights. A hat unlike anything any of them had ever seen. They laughed at him. The hat was absurd. It was enormous. No self-respecting man in the eastern states would be caught dead in something so exaggerated. John wore it anyway, and the longer he wore it, the less funny it seemed, because the hat worked. It blocked the sun during the blazing afternoons. It shed rain like a roof. It held water, and Stetson apparently demonstrated this by filling the brim to give his horse a drink. It was purpose-built for the environment they were moving through, and every man in that group could see it. Then something completely unexpected happened. A passing bullwhacker, a wagon driver working the long cattle trails of the West, spotted the hat. He stopped. He looked at it. He wanted it. He offered John Stetson $5 in gold coin right there on the trail. $5. In 1862, for a hat that Stetson had made on the spot from leftover pelts. That was the first Stetson hat ever sold, and John Stetson never forgot it. He spent time in the Colorado goldfields, working alongside other prospectors, breathing the high mountain air that his doctors had prescribed. And something remarkable happened. The tuberculosis, which had been a guaranteed death sentence back in New Jersey, began to lose its grip. The dry altitude, the physical activity, the clean air of the Rockies, whatever the combination was, his body began to fight back. The man who had been told he had months to live was still alive. Not just alive, he was getting stronger. By the time he turned his eyes back east, John Stetson had survived what his doctor said would kill him. He had watched the West, studied the men who lived and worked there, and understood something that no hat manufacturer sitting in a Philadelphia workshop could have grasped without seeing it firsthand. The men of the American West needed a different kind of hat. What they had, coonskin caps, battered army surplus, whatever they could get their hands on was inadequate. Coonskin caps attracted fleas. Most hats offered no real sun protection. None of them held up in the rain. None of them were built for the life these men actually lived. Stetson knew he could fix that. He knew exactly how to fix it. In 1865, John Batterson Stetson arrived in Philadelphia with roughly $60 borrowed from his sister, a small supply of fur, and a set of hat-making tools. He rented a single room. He set up his operation. He was 35 years old, still not wealthy, still without formal credentials, still carrying the weight of every failure and setback that had chased him from New Jersey to Missouri to Colorado and back again. He sat down and made the hat. He designed it the way he had designed that first one on the trail. Wide brim, tall crown, premium fur felt, built to handle everything the frontier could throw at it. He named it the Boss of the Plains. The name alone tells you something about the ambition behind it. This wasn't a hat for a gentleman in a drawing room. This was a hat for the man who ran things under an open sky. The problem was that nobody in Philadelphia wanted it. Stetson tried to sell his Boss of the Plains to Eastern retailers and got almost nothing in return. The men of the East had their derbies, their top hats, their fashionable headwear imported from European traditions. A massive frontier hat made sense to a cattleman in Texas. It made no sense at all to a shopkeeper in Philadelphia. For a brief, discouraging moment, it looked like the great idea born on the trail was going to die in a small workshop. But Stetson understood something important about his product. Its natural audience wasn't here. It was out there, in the Southwest, in Texas, in the territories where men spent their lives outdoors and needed protection that fashion-focused Eastern hats simply couldn't provide. So he did something ingenious. He took samples of the Boss of the Plains and sent them directly to merchants across the Southwest, along with a letter asking for a minimum order of 12 hats. He was essentially pioneering direct-to-market sales, bypassing the fashionable gatekeepers of the East and going straight to the people who would actually use the product. The response was immediate. The Southwest said yes. Within a year of that first outreach, orders were flooding back to Stetson's little Philadelphia workshop. Cowboys who had spent their lives working in inadequate headwear were encountering the Boss of the Plains for the first time and recognizing it instantly for what it was, the best hat ever made for the life they led. Word spread fast in those communities. A hat that could shade your face, shed rain, water your horse, signal across a distance, and hold its shape through a cattle drive was not just useful, it was essential. Within a decade, the name Stetson had become so synonymous with the word hat in the American West that cowboys simply called any quality hat a Stetson, regardless of who made it. Stetson's workshop couldn't keep up. He moved to larger quarters, then larger still. In 1869, he introduced a traveling sales force. Men who would carry samples and take orders across the country, bringing the Stetson name into every corner of the growing nation. This was still years before most manufacturers had developed anything like a professional sales operation, and it gave Stetson an extraordinary reach. The orders kept coming, the factory kept growing. By the early 1880s, the John B. Stetson Company had outgrown multiple Philadelphia locations and settled into a massive complex in the northeast part of the city. Buildings went up, machines were added, workers arrived by the hundreds. The hats themselves were refined and expanded. The boss of the planes remained the core product, but Stetson understood that the market wanted variety. He developed versions with creased crowns, different brim widths and styles suited to different climates and different kinds of work. The basic formula was premium fur felt, a wide brim, and durable construction, and that remained constant across all of them. What changed was the shape. Over time, as cowboys across the West began to customize their own hats to personal preference, the Stetson evolved into dozens of regional variations, each with its own identity. And then the legends found it. Buffalo Bill Cody was arguably the most famous man in America during the 1880s and the 1890s. His Wild West show drawing crowds across the country and eventually across Europe. Buffalo Bill wore a Stetson. When the most celebrated figure of the American West made a hat part of his public identity, that hat became more than clothing. It became mythology. Annie Oakley, the sharpshooter whose precision made audiences gasp, posed for photographs in an upswept Stetson with a metal star. Calamity Jane, Will Rogers, the legends of the frontier, real and performed, were all photographed in Stetson hats, and every photograph reinforced the association between the hat and the idea of the West itself. Hollywood would only accelerate this. Tom Mix, the first great cowboy movie star of the silent film era, appeared in nearly 300 films wearing a Stetson. His association with the brand was so complete that Stetson eventually named a hat after him. The cowboy hat, as a cultural symbol, was now inseparable from the Stetson name, and the Stetson name was inseparable from American identity. Back in Philadelphia, the factory had grown into something that would have seemed impossible to the young man who rented that first single room with $60 borrowed dollars. By the early 20th century, the Stetson complex covered 9 acres and contained 25 buildings. Over 5,000 workers reported to work there every day. The factory was producing more than 3 million hats every single year. It was, by any credible measure, the largest hat factory in the world. But here is what I find most remarkable about John Stetson. Not the factory, not the scale, not the famous customers. It's what he did with all of that success. Stetson was a devout Baptist, and his religious convictions shaped the way he ran his company. At a time when American industry treated workers as interchangeable parts, Stetson took a dramatically different approach. He paid wages that were considered generous for the era. He provided year-round employment in an industry famous for its seasonal feast and famine cycles. He created a profit-sharing program that gave workers a direct stake in the company's performance. He issued $500,000 worth of company stock for distribution to employees based on merit and length of service. He built a free hospital on land adjacent to the factory. open to workers and the surrounding community. He established the John B. Stetson Building Association, which offered workers below market rate loans so they could become homeowners. He added a company library, a dentist, an auditorium, athletic fields. He brought Christmas bonuses and paid vacation into an industry where those things were nearly unheard of. When asked about his approach to business, Stetson put it plainly. "My aim," he said, "is to do good work at fair prices." It sounds simple. In the context of Gilded Age American capitalism, it was radical. His philanthropy extended beyond the factory walls. He donated extensively to Temple University in Philadelphia. He endowed an academy in DeLand, Florida, in 1888 that eventually grew and changed its name to Stetson University, and it is still operating today. In 1900, he funded the founding of the first law school in the state of Florida, now known as Stetson University College of Law, which is remarkable when you consider where all of this started. A sick young man with no education, no money, and a doctor's verdict that his time was nearly up. The man who built the largest hat factory in the world, who put his name on a university and a law school, who employed 5,000 workers and changed the landscape of American manufacturing. That man had been told in his late 20s that he was done. He would outlive the doctor who gave him that diagnosis by decades. John Batterson Stetson died on February 18, 1906, in his mansion in DeLand, Florida, at the age of 75. He had survived his terminal tuberculosis diagnosis by nearly 50 years. The company he built did not die with him. The factory ran for decades more. The brand endured through the 20th century and into the 21st. And the hat he invented on a frontier trail, made from scraps of animal fur to entertain a group of skeptical travelers, became the defining symbol of an entire mythology. Today, the Stetson name is still on hats sold around the world. 150 years after he walked into a Philadelphia workshop with 60 borrowed dollars and a vision, the brand he built remains synonymous with the American West. It is, as one historian put it, like Coke or Kleenex, a name that has come to mean not just the product, but the idea the product represents. The cowboy hat was not invented by the cowboy. It was invented by a dying New Jersey boy who refused to die on anyone else's schedule, a man who had everything taken from him, his health, his business, his chance to serve, and who used all of that loss as fuel to create something the world had never seen. John Stetson showed us that the hardest roads have a way of leading to the most extraordinary destinations, that the diagnosis, the flood, the rejection, none of it determines the end of the story, that sometimes the thing that seems most like a death sentence is actually the beginning of the only life worth living. And that is how a dying boy from New Jersey became the boss of the plains.